So you couldn't get Star Wars The Last Jedi tickets, huh? Yeah, that's kind of how the creators of this show felt when they thought that they were going to get a third season. How's it going, everyone? David here. So you guys voted for it, here it is, and then you voted again to determine how I was going to proceed with this review, and you guys spoke. So here I am to really break it down as to why it is this is one of my favorite cartoon shows ever, despite being a little biased. I am, of course, talking about none other than the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series. You voted for this to be one of my next classic reviews, and you guys also voted for this to be separated into 2 separate videos so I can go really fully in depth into each one of the 2 seasons that were aired for this show. So here I am to break down season 1. It's gonna be slightly spoilerish. I'm gonna try to be vague with very specific details, so I'm not gonna break down every single little event that transpired from episode to episode, but I'm gonna try to kind of envelope the entire first season and to try to break down how certain things go down and why exactly this show is as praised as it is, while at the same time breaking down certain things that may or may not have held up since the years that this originally aired back in 2008. But again, I'm gonna go into somewhat of a detail, so some mild spoilers might go down in this review if you have never watched the Spectacular Spider-Man animated show. And if you have not, I'm telling you right here at the beginning of the video that I definitely recommend picking it up either on DVD or on Blu-ray from your nearest retailer or online shop or whatever the fuck. Because if you're a true Spider-Man fan, then you need to do yourself a service and watch this show. Need more convincing? Here I am to talk about season 1. On March 8th, 2008, the Spectacular Spider-Man premiered on the Kids WB section of the CW, which is basically where they show all their youth programming that involved mainly cartoons, mainly on Saturday mornings. And that's where we got the Spectacular Spider-Man, brought to us by creators Greg Weisman and Victor Cook. And they really envisioned something brand new for the web-slinger, particularly something that drew not only major influences from the Ultimate Universe as well as the comic books that, of course, have always influenced Spider-Man, various interpretations of Spider-Man from the television series from the 1970s to even the 90s animated series that we all kind of grew up with mainly, to even outside of the television series, you also got the movies, and this show really was heavily influenced by the Sam Raimi films in various ways than just one, and you'll get an idea as to where I'm coming from with that statement later on in the review. But this was mainly teased as a Saturday morning cartoon, and we saw so many commercials where they had the music and they had the action and the quips and stuff like that, and it looked like a typical Spider-Man cartoon that didn't look like it was doing anything new from that original 90s show. So it's like, okay, you know, we'll give it a watch. But after episode after episode, week after week, all of us true believers, see what I did there, really started to realize that we might actually have something rather special happening with the Spectacular Spider-Man. And the reason for that being is that it's actually just much more than just your average Spider-Man Saturday morning cartoon, because that's how Weisman and Cook looked at it. For one, the show starts off with one of the catchiest theme songs ever. Before I talk about the actual reason as to what makes this show so great, that fucking theme song, I cannot get it out of my head. And I can't get it out of my iPod either. It's on my iPod. I'm not kidding. My girlfriend caught me listening to it one time. She considered breaking up with me. It's one of the best themes for the web-slinger that we've had in a while, ever since the Aerosmith-driven theme song from the 90s. At least from the television aspect sort of thing. And it's a really great theme that, because of the way it goes with its fuse of rock at the same time, having these like little things like the little, you know, it's very reminiscent of that old Spidey, even back in the 70s where they got that whole porn music type of thing. It's a perfect blend of sound that really encapsulates what Spider-Man is all about, especially because of the approach that Weisman and Cook took with this. It could have done the easy route of doing all of these great action sequences and have really pristine animation, which it really does. I really appreciate the design Spider-Man. I really like how sleek and slender everybody's animation looks, while at the same time still having that faithful look to how they did in the comics, only with a slight little twist. Although it is kind of weird that ever so often you got a character who has got like really weird elbows. All the characters in this show have really weird ass looking elbows, and for some reason ever so often, including our main character, has like a random mole on them. It's like, what's with this animator and moles all of a sudden? The action sequences are unrelentless for a Saturday morning cartoon and are very engaging and fun, that almost make them rather much more entertaining than some current action movies nowadays. Even if it's animated, you know what's going on, you feel the punches, you feel everything that's going down. And also, I love that they took inspiration from the movies, down to where there's even shots that are straight up lifted from the Sam Raimi films. So the way that Spider-Man maneuvers himself, swings around the city, and catches an opponent or something, there's always something within the detail of the animation that's either reminiscent of the Sam Raimi movies, or something that just feels brand new for the character, that feels like he's even got his own style that separates him from previous versions that we've seen the character be on TV, most especially that 90s show. So all of these elements could have made for a very entertaining but rather bare and essential Spider-Man Saturday morning cartoon. But what makes it stand out over that, and what made us realize that we have something really special on our hands, is the writing. It's that type of writing that reminded me an awful lot of Batman the Animated Series, and even Gargoyles to an extent, where, yes, the creators know that they made an animated show, so they're going to have elements that cater to the kids. But they know that Spider-Man is beloved by all, so they need to be able to really service all. That's the key point here, to make sure that they're not talking down or talking up to anybody. And striking that balance is a very rare thing, and it's a very rare thing that Spectacular Spider-Man was able to capture. It's like lightning in a bottle. First of all, we don't have an origin story. This show came out at 2008, 1 year after the trilogy wrapped up for Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. So that whole origin aspect, especially everything that has to do with Uncle Ben, was rather fresh on our minds. So Victor Cook and Weisman, they were all like, yeah, we're just gonna skip on that, alright? We already did that. We literally just did that prior to the reboot by Andrew Garfield and Mark Webb. Mark Webb, I'll still laugh at that. So let's skip the origin, at least for now. The show starts right off from the beginning of the season with Spider-Man doing his average Spider-Man thing, and there's allusions to the stuff that has happened in the events prior to the show's beginning with Uncle Ben, and how Peter learned about with great power comes with great responsibility, but it never really forces it on you. It never beats over the head that, yes, he's still learning these things. No, he's just average Spider-Man. On top of that, he's a high schooler. He's not in college. He's not an adult. He's not even a young adult. He's a legitimate 16-year-old kid still going to Magnet High, or whatever it's called, Magnet Squared as they put it, Magnet Cubed. And he goes to high school with all of the classic characters that you know from the Spider-Man mythos, from Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, even Flash Thompson is in there, and various other characters that have made certain appearances from the Ultimate Universe to some of the most recent comics like Liz Allen and whatnot. And it's cool that one of the biggest aspects about this show and why it makes it work is that every single one of these characters, from the annoying ones like Flash Thompson to one of the more likable ones that you sympathize with like Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn, and of course Peter himself, are likable. That's something that's has been a little iffy on the movie side, is that this is probably one of the best interpretations of not just Spider-Man, but Peter Parker, and that's what makes the show work, and that's what gives it its spine. And Peter and all of these characters being in high school is one of the most believable elements of the show. Even with it being animated, his relationships, the way he talks to everybody, and even to the people that he talks to outside of school within the Daily Bugle, like J. Jonah Jameson, Robbie Robertson, or I think that's his name, and then you got even Betty Brant in there. All of his relationships, the way he talks to everybody is realistic, even when some of those relationships have very significant flaws. Later down the line, he's going to have problems with these people that he's close to, people that he loves, people that he cares about. He's going to hurt them, and that's all because they pay attention to how frustrating it can be for Peter to also be Spider-Man while being in high school. It could be treated in a very undermining way by any other person that's headlining any other kind of show where it's like, hey, look how funky-dory it is. But Spectacular Spider-Man never talks down to its audience, never treats its audience like an immature little baby like Ultimate Spider-Man kind of does, with the literal baby version of Spider-Man talking to the fucking camera. Yes, you have Peter narrating with voiceover, and every so often it could be a little forced to have another character be like, oh, it's like you're living a double life, and you got that little overlay over his face showing that, oh, he's Spider-Man. Yes, that could be a little laid on thick, but the show realizes that creating drama that makes us care for these characters is what elevates those technical things that I was mentioning earlier about it being a really excellent Saturday morning cartoon even better. Is that whenever we're in these action sequences, and the reason for why I said that you could feel every punch and every kick is because you feel for the character. When Peter gets put in jeopardy, or when any supporting character gets put in jeopardy, especially when that character manages to be Gwen Stacy, and all of us avid comic book readers know exactly what happens with Gwen Stacy, you can kind of feel it because you like these characters, you want to see them prosper, and you want to see these relationships going in a much bigger direction. But what's also very important is that you're still dealing with a man dressed up in a red and blue outfit spinning webs. So you can't take that way too seriously like some filmmakers do nowadays. And that's what Weisman and Cook realized. There's still humor to be found in almost every single one of the episodes. Spider-Man still retains his average quippage, as he even puts it, where he's delivering pun after pun, line after line, teasing his villains.
Look, we gotta stop meeting like this. People are starting to talk.
What'd you call me?
Lightning Bud? Come one, come all! Before your very eyes, the world's largest dehydrated turtle!
She won't stop, I swear!
Oh, the Hobbit took out the brakes! And now that you troglodytes have deduced that the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, I'm not dead.
While at the same time also keeping that spirit as alive as he possibly can, even with the drama going on around him. And that's an instant likability characteristic to the character that they got right, and something that the Amazing Spider-Man movies were not able to get right, because yeah, they got Spider-Man down to a T with his quips and all that, but Peter himself was kind of a douche around home. This is a Peter that I want to see succeed, but the tragedy with Peter Parker has always been that no matter how hard he tries, him trying to balance his life of being both Spider-Man and Peter Parker is not always going to work out for everybody involved. Maybe for a couple of folks, but not 100% everybody, including himself. And that's something that the show was able to do really well, when Peter's simply just trying to get home by curfew, and not doing so disappoints his aunt. And him being upset at the notion that Aunt May is upset is instantly likable and also relatable. And what makes all these things with the characters really prosperous, of course, all the voice talent behind the characters. Everybody does an exceptional job, and of course, the coup de grace of them all is Josh Keaton, who's a regular voice actor. He's been in so many other shows and TV movies and all that stuff, but I think that this is his magnus opus as a voice actor, is Peter Parker / Spider-Man here in Spectacular Spider-Man, because he carries the show, and his narration could have easily been annoying or a little heavy-handed, just like Ultimate Spider-Man kind of does, but I'm glad to see that Josh Keaton was able to strike a perfect balance as to really feel how Peter Parker feels with this dilemma that he faces from episode to episode, especially when stuff starts to get really crucial towards the tail end of season 1. You can hear the slight changes in his voice, and he did a terrific job with that.
This alien, it's some kind of symbiote. Still, what do we care? The 6 were put down hard. Parker gets paid for the photos. What else matters?
If I was to give some honorable mentions, I would have to give it to J. Jonah Jameson, who sounds very close to J.K. Simmons as that character, and also the guy behind Tombstone. I want to say it was Keith David, but I might be wrong because it sounded a little bit different. But I think he did a cool job because the voice sounds that awesome, and it made me want to see Tombstone more, even though he's one of the villains. He's one of those villains that I wanted to see more on screen because of how much of a presence he had, and I think that the voice really helped with that. But high school drama can't be the only thing that could be bogging down Spider-Man, because with a superhero arising, supervillains are going to be very quick to follow, and Spectacular Spider-Man does not treat its villains any different than it does its heroes when it comes to the writing, the way that they're designed, the way that they're voice acted, and the way that they engage with the spider in the action sequences, because they are a terrific rogue gallery to be presented here in Spectacular Spider-Man, all within season 1. And they have some of the greater origins that I've seen in a while. Now, I will admit that the way that the villains are kind of introduced in this show could be a little case of the week, where every episode during the first, I want to say 3/4 of this first season is like every episode is a brand new villain. And it kind of reminds me of those procedural shows, especially the way that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. started off, where every episode was a brand new thing, a brand new villain, or a brand new thing that they had to go after. Spectacular Regular Spider-Man kind of starts off with that when it comes to its villains. However, what they really get right are two things. One, despite every villain being brand new for the first, I want to say 9 episodes or so, there's always a thorough line that's connecting them. There's something going on in the background, whether it be with Tombstone's character or Norman Osborn's character, that are pulling the strings secretly. But even outside of that, you got Peter dealing with the stuff at school and with Aunt May that's always cohesive. It's always going on in the background, and it almost serves as webbing to tie all these things in together. There's somebody standing in front of the computer saying to themselves, if David does another pun in this review, I fucking swear to God. A lot of shows just abandon things and just almost forgets about them from episode to episode. This show literally ends with something happening in Peter's life, and then the next episode kind of picks up right where it left off. And I'm like, how many other shows that aren't even animated, they're live action, don't even do this? And I love that. Plus, after a while, it starts to kind of do that with even some of its villains. Because there's some villains that are on the back burner where, yeah, they get introduced in one episode and they have their exit towards the end of the episode. But then there's others that are kind of lingering in the background until much later when they get their supervillain origin. And it's done really well. To me, the biggest standouts when it comes to Spider-Man's rogue gallery of villains would have to be the Green Goblin, Venom, and Dr. Octopus. Not only because they had great voice acting, they also had some of the more sympathetic backgrounds when you felt for them, and all of these characteristics that made them very interesting and very understandable villains. You understood where they were coming from and why it is that they turned into villains and why they wanted to be heard. It's not necessarily limited to just those three. Some of the other villains, like Electro, they all have their little quirk that makes you understand them and really relate to them as to why they turn into villains, why they turn bad. But what really makes those three stand out is that they linger in the background for the majority of season 1 until they make their turn into being a supervillain. They have their biggest arc. So when you see them from episode to episode as just a normal person, and then they go into supervillain mode, it's like, oh my god, I saw you as a regular human being, and now this is happening to you. I feel for you. It hurts more to see you turn. Dr. Octavius has that one line that gets me every time, right before he gets fused with the tentacles.
I've been good!
That to me is the embodiment as to why these villains work. Now, if I was to complain about something that I never really noticed back when I first watched the show, is that there's two big little issues that are a little understandable, but at the same time, they're still there for this show when it comes to its villains. For one, the way that they acquire their name could be a little hokey.
I'm the Vulture! But everyone will know the name Sandman! I'm Electro! Call me Rhino!
Call me Dr. Octopus!
Every so often, they could do something smart with it, like Norman calls Dr. Octavius, be a good little Dr. Octopus, because he notices that he has 8 limbs. But then later, Doc Ock talks to Spidey and says, call me Dr. Octopus. You know, it's like, that was fine. You didn't really have to reiterate, and they did that a number of times with various of the supervillains, like Shocker.
And that came as a bit of a shocker, eh, Bug?
Who are you?
Call me, well, how's about Shocker?
The Shocker. It's like, it's a little in your face, but it's a Saturday morning cartoon. It comes with the territory. And I guess on a much more critical level with the writing, I kind of feel like ever so often some of these villains have a very rather sharp turn when it comes to them turning to villainy, where the development was there. Like, they have sympathetic backgrounds to them, but sometimes their turn to villainy, to being like super evil, to where they change their voice or something, can be just slightly rushed. And it could be because every episode it's only 22 minutes minus the commercials. We're dealing with a 22-minute episode, so we can't have that moment like in Spider-Man 2 where Doc Ock is just like standing there absorbing everything that's happening to him and then slowly trying to transform, or like various other interpretations of the characters I've done before. So you can't do that. Again, comes with the territory, but it's a little criticism that I've noticed rewatching the show. But if you're like me, who was starting to think that the villains were getting a little hokey with their names and whatnot, the show reminds you that it's not messing around. It is not fucking around, because towards the last quarter of the season, if I was to estimate here, it abandons that whole case of the week thing, and then we have a very thorough plotline that involves the symbiote, as well as every single villain you met up until this point, forming the Sinister Six, that kind of serves as a really good counterpart to the symbiote, because now having Peter be a little bit stronger with the symbiote and going through that arc that deals with him being tempted into using this power and whatnot, you gotta kind of elevate the stakes, and the stakes really get elevated towards the tail end here of season 1. You got the introduction of Venom, who's just clearly not fucking around. This is probably one of the most intimidating versions of Venom I've seen in a while, more so than even Spider-Man 3, where even Peter's getting tired of his quips, and this is Spider-Man we're dealing with. If he gets tired of somebody rambling on, there's definitely a problem happening. And then you got the whole conjunction of the Sinister Six, who know that together they can really beat the Spider-Man, and there's a level of threat there. And I love that this is how season 1 was planning on really wrapping up. If I was to come up with any other complaint for the show after rewatching it after all these years, would have to be that, again, comes with the territory of being a Saturday morning cartoon. Kids are still going to be tuning in and are going to try to follow these several really sophisticated plot lines. So ever so often you have a character that divulges a little bit too much into exposition, where they have to mention almost every little thing that's happening, one of which could be Peter himself. He often narrates with voiceover every single little thing that's happening.
The gene cleanser. Almost forgot I hid it here. This antidote solved Doc Connor's little lizard problem.
So, could have done with that now being an adult, but I understand why it's there, because of the kids. For the kids. The kids. So as I wrapped season 1 with Thanksgiving dinner amongst our beloved characters, that it was actually rather intended by the creators. They meant every season to reflect a slice of Peter's life by separating it into quarters or semesters throughout high school. So now that it's wrapping up with like the middle of the holidays for Peter, where he's kind of off school, season 2 is supposed to pick up with him either going through Christmas or jumping almost right back into school after that winter break. So ending it with Thanksgiving and having dinner with the Stacy family along with Peter's own family, and really reminding Peter as to what it is that he does, the whole Spider-Man thing, reminding him why it is that he goes through these turmoils day after day of trying to strike that balance between being a superhero and being an ordinary teenager in high school. I thought that that was a really good punctuation mark to really wrap up the season after all the shit that went down that was titillating on being rather dark, but never went that extra mile that you kind of want to save for a second season. So I thought that was really cool, and it really wrapped up a great first season for a show that was able to really hit a home run for the character of Spider-Man and for any other character that's involved within his mythology, because yes, you can have great action sequences, awesome animation, but if the story and the character is not your spine that really holds it all together, then you really got an ordinary show. And Spectacular Spider-Man was able to precede that by making sure that they got what makes the character special right, and that is that Spider-Man is that person that we can all kind of put our shoes in, no matter if we're not able to really swing or stick to walls or do all these kind of things. It's that inner turmoil that that reminds us that Spider-Man is still human after all. And Spider-Man has always been my favorite character, and I'm glad that a show like Spectacular Spider-Man was able to get it right. So it's now up to Peter and the rest of the gang to face some even harsher turmoils and some bigger stakes in season 2, with one very devious and evil threat looming in the distance for our beloved characters and our beloved wall-crawling, web-slinging hero, Sony Pictures. So that does it for my review of Season 1 of Spectacular Spider-Man. Obviously, stay tuned for a review follow-up on Season 2 of Spectacular Spider-Man. In the meantime, you can always like and share this video. Comment below with what you guys remember from Spectacular Spider-Man back in 2008. What were your fondest memories? What did you love the most about the show? Do you have any complaints now, kind of revisiting it? If you were to do so, if you haven't done so already, then please check out the series. You can find it on Amazon, iTunes, whatever, digitally, or on DVD or Blu-ray, whatever. I highly recommend it, because if you haven't already watched the show, it's an amazing show, and it's one not to be missed, especially if you're a humongous Spider-Man fan. Skip all that ultimate shit that's happening right now and just rewatch this instead. Use your time wisely and watch this show 2 or 3 times if need be. Until next time, guys, take care. And that's gotta be pretty much the whole division that makes up the antagonist for this film. Specifically, Jesus playing our main villain here, Neander Wallace. Of course, I'm talking about Jared Leto. Always trying to bring on that Jesus complex with the fucking hair and the beard. Whatever. Anyways.